Yes, everybody, welcome. Today we got a treat for you. Andrew Wilson on the Joe Rogan Experience. Like one thing about Joe Rogan, and obviously he's a very famous podcaster, stuff like that, just because of all the individuals that he has and how he's changed over the years. And obviously you have Andrew Wilson, probably one of the most big debaters when it comes to the conservative movement. You know, he's a founder of the Crucible. The way his approach style is different. And yeah, it was interesting to see that he was on Joe Rogan. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna take some of the clips from the actual podcast. I watched the whole thing, but there's a few sections there that I want to really get into. And in this one, he's talking about power and what's going on in Minneapolis and how that transitions or translates to basically the country whole. So let's go ahead and get into it and listen.
What the hell are we fighting over here? Well, we're fighting over the fact that the left is just trying to ingratiate itself with power, and they don't really care about what the moral paradigm is. As long as they can get their people in power, they'll use anything as a linchpin issue.
That's right. That's right. It's all about power. The whole thing is about power. And that's what people need to truly understand. You're being played. You're being played. You're being played in Minneapolis. You're being played all around the country. It's about power. It's about them getting power.
And this is actually to some degree true, right? Because one of the arguments that and you'll see Andrew bring it up when it comes to Christians is that they think that if Christians come into power, they're going to usher in Christian nationalism. That's one of the big things that you see a lot, especially with Democrats, left wings, and all that. That Christian nationalism, obviously, since the Trump coming into power or Trump has been elected, you've seen things about Christian nationalism, and the Democrats are really trying to make this a right wing. They're just trying to instill Christianity. Don Lemon used this defense a lot. Jennifer Wall uses this defense a lot. Tiffany Cross uses. When you watch CNN, MSNBC, a lot of the things is that they're trying to fearmonger you into thinking that Christian nationalism is the only thing, apparently, the only group that is trying to look for power when they're trying to look for power too. These pro-immigration, let anybody in, pro-abortion, they're all trying to look for power, right? And the whole country as a whole is basically that. Democrat wins, they get power. Republican wins, they get power. And so it's basically just ideologies grasping for power. People to say, why do you want to get elected? I want to have a change. I want to do this and that. And I think Wilson tends to believe that the way you enforce things is through power. And so for him it's better that Christians have power or those who align with him to have power. And to say otherwise would be a lie. And here Joe Rogan is actually saying the same thing, that the left wants power. The Democrats want the power because they want to be able to alter, to change things, right? Because you already heard it. When what is it? Eric Sewell, whatever his name is, he's running for governor. He said, when I'm governor, I want to dox the ICE members. I want to take away their license. Again, power. Newsom wants to become president. Power. To change things, to make it more democratic. He wants to Californianize the United States. Anytime you have anybody trying to be elected to government or something like that, it's power. It's a power grab. And to say otherwise is completely stupid.
If you think that once they get if they were successful, they imported millions more to all these swing states, they allow them to vote, they completely rigged the system. Yeah. Now it's only, you think that's going to be good for everybody? You're out of your fucking mind.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you think then that Christians knowing this, they know that these are bids for power? When you have Christian nationalism on the rise and Christians moving towards that, doesn't that seem like it's a rational and reasonable thing to do for them to want the mindset of, if we're not in power, they will be in power.
Right. Okay. And this is actually a thing, right? They hear the word Christian nationalism, they're like, oh my God, everybody's going to be living under, and you'll hear Andrew say a theocracy. Christian nationalism, basically, and even Christians as a whole, let me just take away Christian nationalism because that's like a boogie word. One thing that I did mention when I was dealing with Jennifer Waltz and her version of Christianity is, when you have legitimate Christians, the whole point is that if you have Christians in organization and power, if you have them in politics, if you have them that, they're going to make laws that reflect a lot of what Christianity teaches, a lot of what the Bible says, right? Because the argument of a Christian is that God is just, that God's laws are righteous. And so thus the laws of a nation ought to reflect the laws of God. And so Christians trying to be empowered, trying to change these things are basically just letting out or basically trying to resemble what they believe would be the righteous way to rule a government. Democrats don't like that because they're not the ones in power. They don't like that. That's why they're so big against abortion. That's why they're so big against trying to they always try to throw it off with, especially with the immigration thing. Oh, I thought Jesus said to love your neighbor, to welcome the foreigner, right? Because they want a certain way of structuring the power, social welfare. Nobody has to work. Bernie Sanders and a lot of the people like Zola Madani, we should have no billionaires, no millionaires. All of this stuff, it comes from their perspective and what they want to put into power. They just don't like it. And a lot of times it's just very anti-Christian, very anti-Christian. Madani would, or any type of Islamic government would impose Islam. And I think it's always interesting when it comes to it, when they have no problem with a Muslim coming into power and then trying to rearrange it, because if you understand Islam, it tends to spread real quickly, and the point is to proselytize people. That's why Islam is one of the fastest growing religions. Thus, a lot of the time when you look at the Middle East, a lot of the Muslim countries reflect Islam. They do reflect it. Once in a while, you have some weird, deviation of it, but for the most part, look at the Middle East. A lot of the countries tend to display the Muslim teachings into their own government. When it comes to the Western world, it used to be a Christianized thing, but because we believe in religious pluralism, we say, oh, this and that. We'll just take a little bit of this. We'll take a little bit of that. We'll take a little bit of this. We'll take a little bit of that. And we'll say that, right? Because you had Cash Patel talking about, I'll see you in Valhalla. That is not a Christian thing, my brother, right? But again, because we believe in the difference of religion and all this crap, it is what it is. But what you tend to have with Democrats is they tend to be almost atheistic in nature. They use God, but they use it as a very vague, ambiguous terminology to encompass all religions. Yeah, we're all leading to the same thing. But that in itself is a worldview that imposes a power, right? To be pro-abortion is to believe that humanity comes at a certain point, and then you impose that power. You pass laws to ensure that women can do whatever they want with their bodies. And so Wilson here is correct. If Christians are trying to be in politics and think that this is the way that God wants us to set up a nation and to be just and to be righteous, obviously, as we get involved into the politics and we get involved in government, we're going to want to change it. And so it's kind of dumb for the left or the Democrats to think, well, the Christians are not going to do anything. And that's true. In this country, what we've seen is a lot of Christians have been footing back. And this is, I think, what Andrew's trying to get into.
It's rational from their perspective, for sure. What people are terrified of is that it would restrict the freedom of religion and that you would impose Christianity on the entire country. And I don't.
But we already see this. When Democrats are in power, they're really big on, don't teach no prayer, no command, don't teach the 10 Commandments. They're pretty big. They like I've said before, when Democrats are in power, or even left wing that tend to be anti-Christian or anti-God, what they try to do is they try to minimize the Christian influence by telling the Christians to keep it in their home, to keep it private. That's what they're trying to say. Okay, we don't want that here. They'll use talking points like, we don't want religion to be involved in things, right? That's just religious talk. That's just spiritual talk. That's ways, guys. Those are key terms into how they want to push, particularly Christianity, out of the realm. And thus, when Christian nationalism seems to be up in the rise, they're just trying to take over. They want to Christianize the country that was never Christianized. Right? They have to kind of rework the United States history, the historical history, that there was, the Protestants were here, but they weren't really trying to say that everybody wants to be Christian. The Catholics, the Quakers, all these, the Methodists, the basic foundation of a lot of the country's religious upbringings, they want to deny. And now they want to be like, well, no, we have Hindus, we have Muslims, so we can't really just be that like Christians. And they think, Christians come into play. They all want us to bow our knees to Christ, only claim Christ. But that's what Christianity is, much like what Islam is. Study Islam and understand this. There's no room for anybody but Allah. All right. They don't have a savior like Jesus, but they have Allah, and there's no room for Allah. Even in their sayings, there's no God but Allah. So to claim that only Christians are trying to change and trying to Christianize the country and trying to make things look like well, how Christians want to is ridiculous. They just don't want to be submissive to the Christian God. If you could prove that this Christian God is the actual God, right? But that's the point, because they want to be their own gods. That's the whole point.
I don't think you should impose any kind of religion on any people. I think people should be free.
I've never seen I know that there are, of course, the people who push that there has to be an established theocracy in order for Christian nationalism to work. But the frameworks that I've seen that have political legitimacy don't seem to push for that at all. They push instead that the idea is that Christians should not be hamstrung from the ideals of holding power itself. That does not make you bad or evil or awful.
Right. And by the way, this is actually symptomatic within Christianity itself, because they tend to say, well, Christians ought to just pray for peace, try not to get involved in the politics. A lot of Christians think that the churches should not be involved in politics, not that they should not try to sway anything. Nothing like that, right? Andrew here, it takes a different approach. Andrew's big on Christians. When they rule, when they have power, they ought to power with a Christian ethics in mind, a Christian framework in mind. Because when you're comparing religions and when you're comparing just worldviews, period, right? Imagine not even you saying religion, but a worldview, period. When you try to do a worldview, period, Christians tend to have a better outlook or a better outcome when it comes to the framework that Christianity tries to play with a nation. I'm not saying that every Christian worldview tends to be the correct one, but the Christian worldview compared to other worldviews tends to produce a better outcome, right? Secular humanists will be like, no, we can work in a secularistic human society. But every time you try to point to them where the heck you have these secular humanistic societies, it falters, or they have to be like, oh, we have to take some of your Christian framework and then stick it in there to make humanism work. And this is what Wilson is trying to say here, right? Where he's saying that it's not necessarily that Christians want to have a theocracy, even though there are some Christians, I'm not going to deny that would say, if we are in power, we do need to establish a better theocracy, a better link to the government, where every law reflects God, and that even government itself reflects God, and that the nation reflects God, right? But if we're not going by that, and we're saying, we Christians want to be in power because the laws just aren't just, they aren't working, and they can look into scripture and say that's a better framework, right? We have better philosophical or logical views or reasoning as to why we can set the nation up that reflects a Christian values better. Then Wilson is basically saying the whole point here is to establish a nation or government that allows Christians in power to then change laws that reflect Christian values, which is nothing wrong with that. Because what tends to happen is, throughout history, what we noticed is that Christian values over and over again seem to be proven right. And that's what he's trying to say here.
No matter what the left says, Christian, or how Christians are supposed to act, and that when you are in power, you should rule with Christian ethics in mind. That's how you're supposed to pass policy, public policy of all kinds, is through those ethical means.
That's
not,
right.
And that's the thing about it, right? Because part of what being a Christian is that the in work, right? The in work of your religiosity is going to come outward, which means you're going to want to reflect what you're doing, right? So if the Christians are saying that Jesus is all of this, right? All of the stuff that he says he is, and that the point of Christianity is to spread and give to other people the same hope that they have, when they're in power, then they're also going to try to spread that same exact message through the government, through reflecting a nation of that same exterior, right? To be Christ-like is going to be an outward thing. And I think what tends to happen is that leftists and Democrats just don't understand this. They think that religion, particularly Christianity, ought to be a privacy thing and not a public display of being that you go to church, you go home, you pray in your house, you do all that, but don't bring it to the public. And Christianity was never such a thing. Never such a thing. If you look at in the New Testament, they constantly are going out into the streets, debating. Paul in Athens, when he's in Mars Hill, arguing with the Epicureans, with the Greek philosophers. Christianity has never been only a private only religion. It's constantly outward, constantly outward. You see the Christianity, John Calvin, the framers the reformers, the Protestants, the Catholics that spread throughout, Mother Teresa, whatever you want to do. When you have Christians, there's never just a privacy of the religion. It's always a publicity that they're trying to spread out. That is the whole thing. And we go back to what I said, right? When these people actually would read the Bible and actually open it and read the thing, not just pick and choose, they can see that the whole point of Christianity is to go out and disciple and convert and spread the message. That's the point, right? And so if you have enough Christians in power, these Christians will reflect it. Now, I'm going to say this. It does not mean that Christians are then they're exempt from corruption. Christians are capable of being corruption. We have seen this before, and this is what the Democrats, I think, fear. This is and it's a well, grounded fear that, okay, well, Christians could be corrupted, and so can normal people. Christians could be corrupted, but what you're hoping is that Christians don't fall into that temptation a lot of the times and are able to stay and govern righteously and not fall for this stuff. And by the way, the point of Christian is that they understand. Christianity always teaches that is not to rely on yourself, not to rely on your own strength, because we've seen it in examples, right? Even the Democrats and leftists that claim like, oh, there are examples of Christians falling. Yeah, there are. There are great examples in the Bible of great men falling. Why? Because you tend to rely on it. But that does not excuse the fact that they can rule righteously, and that they can have these moral grounds. Just because a Christian stumbles doesn't mean that all of Christianity now is ruled out, that all the laws that he passed are garbage. No, a moral man can pass moral laws and yet have immoral thoughts, immoral actions. It's possible. This happens all the time. But leftists and Democrats just don't want Christians to do it, because then they'll want to use the big word, the big H word, hypocrites. They're hypocrites. They're passing laws, but they're doing this. I agree. But then who is not have hypocrisy? And again, it's not saying that all Christians are hypocrites, but there are periods of time. But you just can't take that and say, well, because he's a hypocrite, all the laws that they pass are hypocritical. That's not true.
Sounds like
not, hey,
right.
It's going to be a theocracy.
Right.
That doesn't seem like it's a necessary component.
No, well, people are afraid of the concept of a theocracy. And I think that people are afraid of just human nature, and that if people did get into power, that's what it would become, just like these.
But this is no different than what we're seeing here, right? Because we've seen it in the UK. I would say that these people they're not Christians. They're not, they will claim to be religious. They'll be of the Church of England, but they're not really religious. But look at the way they're cracking down. They're cracking down on posts, on memes. They have the highest arrest count when it comes to just online posting. And and I would say they were not Christian. So again, you fear human nature. That's true. Rogan is right there. Human nature tends to, once it has power, it wants it completely. It wants it absolute power corrupts absolutely, and that's true. And there's no difference in a Christian. What you would hope is that the Christian has enough barriers, enough restraints due to the fact that they are following the teachings of Christ and stuff like that, that they will be able to see it, or they'll surround themselves. Here's another thing: surround themselves with enough Christians that will tell them, "Yo, this is not right," and hopefully that the people in power still go to church. But this is a good conversation. I believe that this is true. I think the left wants to be in power because they seeks power, and that's what it is. Christians want to have power because they want to be able to do it. But guys, let me know what you think. Did you like the podcast? Let me know. Hit the subscribe button, and guys, I'll catch you again on the next one.